Dr. Han Sol Kim pushed his old glasses up his nose and stared at the computer screen. The numbers dancing across the monitor made no sense at first. He had been listening to space signals for 3 years now, just as a hobby after his regular work at Seoul National University. Most nights he heard nothing but static and distant star noise. Tonight was different. The signal was strong and clear. It had patterns that looked almost like language. Hansel felt his heart beat faster. He had studied languages his whole life, but this was something completely new. The patterns repeated every few minutes like someone was trying very hard to be understood. He grabbed his notebook and started writing down the signal patterns. His small apartment was quiet except for the hum of his old radio equipment. His neighbor's TV was playing some drama through the thin walls, but Hansel ignored it. This was too important. After 2 hours of careful work, Hansel began to see the patterns more clearly. The signal was definitely a language, but unlike anything humans had ever made. Some parts looked like math. Other parts seemed to be asking questions. There was one group of signals that kept repeating. Hansel was sure this meant something like hello or can you hear us? His hands shook as he typed his translation attempt into the computer. The aliens, and they had to be aliens, seemed to be asking about something called Project Strength. They wanted to know about Earth's military power. At least that's what Hansel thought they meant. The translation was difficult and he wasn't completely sure. But then Hansel read the message again, more slowly this time. Maybe he was wrong about the military part. The word that looked like strength could mean many things. In Korean, strength could mean physical power, but it could also mean the strength of spirit, the strength to keep going when things were hard, or the strength to help others. Hansel smiled. These aliens probably wanted to learn about human strength in the good way. They wanted to know how humans stayed strong during difficult times. They wanted to understand human spirit and determination. This made much more sense than asking about weapons. He started typing his reply. Hansel told the aliens about Korean history, about how people survived wars and poverty and still helped each other. He wrote about his grandfather, who had lived through the Japanese occupation and the Korean War but still found ways to help his neighbors. He wrote about modern Koreans who worked hard and took care of their families. The message took him 3 hours to write. He tried to make it simple so the aliens could understand. He told them about Korean schools where students studied late into the night. He wrote about Korean families who supported each other through everything. He described how Koreans rebuilt their country after the war and made it strong and peaceful. At the end of his message, Hansel made a big decision. He invited the aliens to visit Earth. He told them he would be happy to show them examples of human strength projects. He was thinking about hospitals where doctors worked to save lives, schools where teachers helped students learn, and community centers where people helped poor families. Hansel sent the message at 3 in the morning. He was too excited to sleep. He had just made first contact with aliens and they seemed friendly. They wanted to learn about the good parts of humanity, not the scary parts. Down the hall, his graduate student Yoonbi Park was also working late. She was writing her thesis about ancient languages, but she often helped Hansel with his space signal hobby. She knew he stayed up late listening for alien messages, though she never expected him to actually find any. Yoonbi heard Hansel moving around his apartment and wondered what he was doing. She almost knocked on his door to ask, but decided not to bother him. She had her own work to finish. The next morning, Hansel could barely contain his excitement. He wanted to tell someone about his discovery, but he also wanted to be careful. If he was wrong about the signals, he would look foolish. If he was right, this was the biggest discovery in human history. He decided to wait for a reply before telling anyone. The aliens might take days or weeks to answer. Space was very big, and signals took time to travel. But Hansel was wrong about the time. In space, far from Earth, the alien message had been received by a large fleet of warships. The aliens had been watching Earth for months, trying to decide if humans were dangerous. They had seen human wars on television broadcasts. They had watched human movies about fighting and violence. They were very worried about human weapons. When the aliens received Hansel's message, their computers tried to translate it. But alien computers were not perfect at understanding human languages. The translation came out very strange. The aliens read about Korean strength and human determination. They read about people who never gave up and always fought back. They read about humans who survived terrible wars and became even stronger. The alien commander, Admiral Vextai, read the translation with growing alarm. These humans were talking about their strength projects like they were proud of their fighting abilities. They were inviting aliens to come see their military training. The human who sent the message even talked about rebuilding after wars, which meant humans were used to fighting. Admiral Vextai called a meeting with his officers. The aliens decided that humans were definitely dangerous, but maybe they could be allies instead of enemies. If humans were as strong as they claimed, it would be better to be friends with them. The alien fleet changed course toward Earth. They would accept the human invitation and see these strength projects for themselves. If humans were really as powerful as they seemed, the aliens wanted to make a treaty with them. Back on Earth, Han Sol was still waiting for a reply. He had no idea that a fleet of alien warships was heading toward his planet. He had no idea that his friendly cultural exchange message had been read as a military threat. He was just excited to meet aliens and show them the best parts of humanity. The biggest misunderstanding in galactic history was about to begin. 3 days later, Han Sol was drinking his morning coffee when his phone rang. The caller ID showed his neighbor's name, Jae-Won Lee. Han Sol wondered why Jae-Won would call so early. Han Sol, are you awake? Jae-Won's voice sounded tired but cheerful. I need a favor. Of course. What do you need? I have to cancel our hiking trip this weekend. I got called to help with a water project in the mountains. Some villages lost their clean water supply after the storm last week. Han Sol felt disappointed about the canceled hike, but then he remembered something important. The aliens had finally replied to his message the night before. They were coming to Earth in 2 days. They wanted to see the human strength projects he had mentioned. Actually, Jae-Won, maybe you can help me instead, Han Sol said. I have some visitors coming and I want to show them our community service projects. You know, the kind of work that shows human strength and spirit. Jae-Won laughed. You mean like disaster relief? Medical aid? That kind of thing? Exactly. Would you mind meeting with my visitors? You're much better at explaining this stuff than I am. Sure, no problem. When and where? Han Sol looked at the alien message again. They had given him coordinates for a meeting place in the park near the university. Tomorrow afternoon at Hangang Park. Just bring some examples of your aid work. Maybe some photos or equipment. Sounds easy enough. Should I dress formally? Han Sol thought about it. The aliens had seemed friendly in their messages. They probably wanted to see real human life, not formal presentations. No, just be yourself. Wear whatever you're comfortable in. The next day, Jae-Won woke up at sunrise. He had spent 6 years in the Korean Special Forces before leaving to work with humanitarian organizations. These days, he helped coordinate disaster relief efforts around Asia. It was hard work, but he loved helping people rebuild their lives after floods, earthquakes, and storms. He looked through his closet for something to wear. The weather was hot and he would be spending the day outside. He chose his most comfortable clothes: cargo shorts, a faded blue t-shirt from an old medical mission, and his favorite walking sandals. The sandals were old and worn, but they were perfect for long days on his feet. Jae-Won packed his work bag with the supplies he always carried. His medical kit had bandages, antiseptics, pain medication, and basic surgical tools. He also packed water purification tablets, emergency food rations, and a satellite phone for communicating in remote areas. He grabbed some photo albums that showed his recent projects. There were pictures from flood relief work in Bangladesh, earthquake recovery in Nepal, and village health programs in Cambodia. He was proud of this work and happy to share it with Han Sol's visitors. Jae-Won arrived at the park early and found a comfortable bench under a tree. The park was quiet except for a few joggers and dog walkers. He opened one of his photo albums and started reviewing the pictures, thinking about what stories he would tell. At exactly 2 o'clock, the sky began to change. Dark shadows appeared above the clouds, growing larger and larger. Jae-Won looked up and saw shapes that definitely were not airplanes. They were huge, metal, and completely silent, alien spaceships. Jae-Won blinked several times, but the ships were still there. 3 enormous vessels, each one bigger than a city block, hovering motionless above the park. He could see lights blinking along their surfaces and strange symbols carved into their hulls. Most people would have run away screaming. But Jae-Won had seen many surprising things in his life. He had worked in war zones where bombs fell from the sky. He had been in earthquakes that split the ground open. He had survived diseases that killed thousands of people. Flying alien ships were definitely new, but they were just another unusual situation to handle. Jaewon waved at the ships like he was greeting old friends. He figured the aliens could probably see him somehow. Being polite never hurt. A beam of light appeared from the largest ship. Jaewon watched with interest as the light formed a platform that lowered slowly to the ground. When it reached the park, several figures stepped off. They were definitely not human. The aliens were tall and thin, with pale blue skin and large dark eyes. They wore what looked like environmental suits with transparent helmets. Each alien carried several devices that were probably weapons or scientific instruments. The leader of the group approached Jaewon carefully. The alien's helmet had a device that spoke in perfect Korean. "Are you the representative of Project Strength?" Jaewon was confused by the question, but he nodded anyway. Hansol had asked him to meet visitors and talk about strength projects, so that was probably what this meant. "I am Jaewon Lee," he said. "Hansol asked me to meet with you. Are you the visitors he mentioned?" The alien leader, Admiral Vexatai, was deeply confused. This human was sitting casually on a park bench, wearing what looked like recreational clothing and simple foot coverings. Where was the military uniform? Where were the weapons? Where were the other soldiers? "You are the military commander of Earth's defensive forces?" Admiral Vextai asked. Jaewon laughed. "Military commander? No, I work with disaster relief. I help people after floods and earthquakes. That kind of thing." The aliens exchanged worried looks. Their translation devices were working perfectly, but this human's words made no sense. Maybe disaster relief was a code name for some kind of military operation. "Show us your strength projects," Admiral Vextai said. Jaewon opened his photo album and moved over on the bench so the aliens could see. "Sure, this is from last month in Bangladesh. The river flooded and destroyed 3 villages. We set up temporary shelters and medical stations." He pointed to a picture of himself standing in muddy water up to his knees, helping carry an elderly woman to safety. In the background, other aid workers were setting up tents and distributing food. The aliens stared at the picture in horror. The human was standing in water that looked contaminated and dangerous without any protective equipment. The conditions looked lethal. "You entered a toxic flood zone without environmental protection?" asked Tactical Officer Morden. "Well, yes," Jaewon said. "People needed help. We couldn't wait for the water to go down." Admiral Vextai felt his breathing apparatus malfunction briefly from shock. This human had voluntarily entered conditions that would kill most galactic species instantly, just to help other humans. And he was talking about it like it was a normal Tuesday afternoon. "Show us more," Admiral Vextai whispered. Jaewon flipped through more photos, cheerfully explaining each project. There were pictures of him working in 120-degree heat, treating patients with deadly diseases, and carrying supplies up mountain paths during blizzards. In every photo, he was smiling and looked completely comfortable. The aliens began taking frantic notes. This single human had survived more extreme conditions than their entire military force combined. And according to his stories, thousands of other humans did this kind of work regularly. Admiral Vextai realized that Earth's strength projects were not military demonstrations at all. They were proof that every human was essentially an unstoppable survival machine that considered lethal environments to be minor inconveniences. The galaxy had seriously underestimated the human species. After looking through the photos for an hour, Jaewon closed the album and stood up from the bench. The aliens watched his every movement carefully, as if he might suddenly explode or shoot laser beams from his eyes. "Would you like to see a current project?" Jaewon asked. "I'm working at a refugee camp about an hour from here. We could go there if you want." Admiral Vexatai consulted with his officers quietly. They had been expecting military facilities and weapons demonstrations. Instead, this human was offering to show them more evidence of human survival abilities. The Admiral decided this was important intelligence gathering. "We accept," Admiral Vextai said. Jaewon pulled out his phone and called for a taxi. The aliens were surprised when he didn't request military transport or security escorts. He was planning to travel to a strategic location in a civilian vehicle, completely unprotected. The taxi driver, an elderly man named Mr. Park, arrived 20 minutes later. He looked at the aliens with mild curiosity but didn't seem particularly surprised. Living in Seoul, he had seen many strange things over the years. "Where are we going?" Mr. Park asked. The refugee camp outside Pyeongchang, Jae-won said. My friends here are international observers. Mr. Park nodded and started driving. During the trip, he chatted with Jae-won about the weather and complained about traffic. The aliens listened to this casual conversation with growing amazement. This human was treating their first contact mission like a routine social visit. When they arrived at the refugee camp, Jae-won paid the taxi fare and thanked Mr. Park. The aliens followed him toward a collection of temporary buildings and tents. Hundreds of humans were living here, displaced by recent flooding in North Korea who had managed to cross the border. So Min Choi, the camp coordinator, saw Jae-won approaching and waved cheerfully. She was a small woman in her 30s with practical short hair and clothes covered in dust. When she noticed the aliens, she walked over to meet them. New volunteers? So Min asked Jae-won. International observers, Jae-won replied. They want to see how our relief operations work. So Min smiled at the aliens. Welcome. We can always use more help. Do any of you have medical training? The aliens exchanged confused looks. This human was asking if they wanted to work in conditions that their species considered a biological hazard zone. We are here to observe only, Admiral Vextai said carefully. That's fine too, Somin said. Just stay out of the way of the working teams. She led them into the camp. The aliens were immediately struck by the harsh conditions. The humans were living in basic tents with minimal protection from the elements. The sanitation facilities were primitive. The air contained numerous biological contaminants that would require their people to wear full hazmat suits. But the humans living here seemed healthy and active. Children were playing games. Adults were working together to improve their temporary homes. Everyone looked like they were managing just fine in conditions that would hospitalize most alien species. How long can humans survive in these conditions? Tactical Officer Morden asked. Oh, some families have been here for 6 months, Somin said. We're working on permanent housing, but it takes time. Everyone's very patient. 6 months. The aliens made notes. Humans could live for half a year in survival conditions without showing signs of distress. They walked toward the medical tent, where Dr. Yuna Shin was treating patients. She was a trauma surgeon who volunteered at the camp during her free time. When she saw the group approaching, she waved them over. Perfect timing, Dr. Yuna said to Jae-won. I need help moving supplies. Without waiting for a response, she handed Jae-won a box of medical equipment and asked So-min to carry another box. The aliens watched as these humans casually handled materials that their sensors identified as potentially dangerous. Inside the medical tent, Dr. Yuna was treating a patient with an infected wound. She worked without gloves or protective equipment, using only basic sterilization procedures. The aliens were horrified. Is it safe to work with infected tissue without full biological protection? Admiral Vextai asked. Dr. Yuna looked up from her patient and laughed. This is nothing. Last year I worked during a cholera outbreak in South Sudan. Now that was challenging. She continued working while talking about her experiences. She had treated victims of 3 major earthquakes, worked during a volcanic eruption in Indonesia, and spent 2 years in refugee camps during various conflicts. She spoke about these experiences like they were interesting vacation stories. The patient she was treating, an elderly woman, smiled at the aliens and started talking in Korean. Jae-won translated for them. Grandmother Hae-young says she's pleased to meet you. She wants to know where you're from. We are from the hegemony many light years away, Admiral Vextai said. Grandmother Hae-young nodded and spoke again. Jae-won translated. She says space travel must be very difficult. She hopes you had a safe journey. Then Grandmother Hae-young began telling stories. She was 89 years old and had lived through the Korean War, the rapid industrialization of South Korea, economic crises, and multiple natural disasters. She had raised 6 children, buried 2 husbands, and helped dozens of grandchildren and great-grandchildren get through school. During the war, we had no food for months, Jae-won translated. She ate tree bark and grass to survive. When the bombs fell, she dug shelters by hand and kept her children safe underground for weeks. The aliens listened with growing alarm. This elderly human had survived conditions that would qualify as torture under galactic law, and she was talking about it while smiling and laughing. After the war, she worked 16-hour days in factories to rebuild the country. Jae-won continued. She saved money to send all her children to university. When the big economic crisis happened in 1997, she sold everything she owned to help her family survive. Grandmother Hei Young spoke again. She says the hard times made her stronger. She's grateful for every day she gets to help other people. Chief Science Officer Quindar quietly ran biological scans on the humans in the camp. The results were disturbing. These humans were surviving on nutrition levels that would starve most galactic species. They were exposed to radiation, toxins, and pathogens that would require immediate medical intervention for his people. Their stress hormone levels indicated they should be in a state of constant panic. But they weren't panicking. They were helping each other, working together, and actually seemed happy. Commander Thelkas approached So-Min with a question. What defensive capabilities does this facility have? So-Min looked confused. Defensive capabilities? We have a first aid station and a communications radio. Why? In case of attack or invasion. Attack by who? So-Min asked. This is a refugee camp. We're here to help people, not fight anyone. The alien realized that these humans had built a facility to house hundreds of people in a potentially hostile environment, and they had not included any weapons or military defenses. They were completely focused on survival and mutual aid. Environmental specialist Zektar was studying Jaewon's sandals with a portable scanner. The footwear provided almost no protection against chemical contamination, biological hazards, or physical trauma. Yet this human had been walking on surfaces that would damage their military-grade boots. How do your feet survive contact with toxic ground materials? Zektar asked. Jaewon looked down at his sandals. They're just comfortable for walking. I've had them for 5 years. 5 years. This human had been using the same minimal foot protection for 5 years while working in hazardous environments across multiple planets. The aliens were beginning to understand that their definition of extreme conditions and the human definition were very different. What they considered deadly, humans considered Tuesday. Back on the alien flagship, Chief Science Officer Quindar was working frantically in his laboratory. The biological samples and scan data from the human refugee camp had revealed something that changed everything the galaxy knew about Earth. Admiral, you need to see this immediately, Quindar called through the ship's communication system. Admiral Vextai arrived in the science lab within minutes, followed by his senior officers. Quindar had multiple screens showing analysis results, atmospheric readings, and biological data. Admiral, we have made a serious error in our assessment of the human species, Quindar began. Earth is not just inhabited by dangerous beings. Earth itself is what galactic classification systems call a Class 12 death world. The aliens stared at the screen in shock. Class 12 was the highest danger rating in their system. Planets with this classification were considered uninhabitable by all known galactic species. Look at these atmospheric readings, Quindar continued. Earth's atmosphere contains 21% oxygen. That concentration would cause immediate organ failure in most of our people. The atmospheric pressure is triple what our species considers safe. The gravity is twice our homeworld standard. Admiral Vextai studied the data carefully. Are you certain these readings are accurate? I have checked them 15 times. But that's not the worst part. Quindar switched to another screen. The planet's surface is covered with biological agents that our medical databases classify as lethal toxins. The humans call them bacteria and viruses. They live with these organisms inside their bodies. Tactical Officer Morden looked sick. Inside their bodies? Not only that, Quindar said. The bacteria help them digest food and fight off other diseases. Humans have evolved a partnership with biological agents that would kill us within hours. Environmental specialist Zektar was studying readings from Jaewon's sandals. Sir, the human footwear samples show traces of over 300 different chemical compounds. Many of these are industrial toxins. The human walked through contaminated soil that would dissolve our ship's hull plating. How is that possible? Admiral Vextai asked. Human skin is apparently resistant to chemical burns that would destroy our protective suits. Their feet have thick layers of dead tissue that act as natural armor plating. Commander Thelkas was reviewing video recordings from the refugee camp. Admiral, I've been analyzing the human behavior patterns. They are not displaying any signs of distress despite living in conditions we would use to torture prisoners of war. The video showed children playing in dirt that contained toxic metals. Adults were eating food prepared in unsanitary conditions. Everyone was breathing air that would require filtration systems for galactic species to survive. They appear to consider these conditions normal. Commander Thelkas continued. The elderly female spoke about surviving worse conditions during something called wartime. She described eating plant matter that our databases classify as non-nutritious fiber. Quindar pulled up more analysis results. I've been studying the medical data from Dr. Yuna Shin. This single human has been exposed to diseases that have no cure in our medical systems. Cholera, typhoid fever, hemorrhagic fever viruses. Any one of these would wipe out entire populations of our people. But she survived all of them. Not just survived. She actively sought out these diseases in order to treat other humans who were infected. She volunteered to expose herself to biological weapons. The aliens looked at each other in growing horror. They had not made first contact with a military species. They had encountered a race of beings who were essentially living biological weapons, evolved on a planet so dangerous that it would kill most galactic life forms just from breathing the Rear Admiral Vextai called up the original message from Hansol Kim now that they understood the true nature of Earth. The human's words took on a terrifying new meaning. He wrote about human strength and determination, Admiral Vextai said slowly. He described humans who survive wars and disasters and become stronger. He invited us to see their strength projects. Sir, Tactical Officer Morden said, I think strength projects might mean their training programs. They are teaching their civilian population to survive in conditions that would challenge our elite military units. The aliens reviewed more of their encounter with Jaewon. This human had casually mentioned working in multiple war zones, disease outbreaks, and natural disasters. He carried medical supplies that could treat injuries their technology couldn't even diagnose. He wore minimal protective equipment while walking through environmental hazards, and they do this voluntarily, Commander Thelkas added. They seek out dangerous situations in order to help other humans survive. This suggests their entire species has military-level training in survival and combat medicine. Environmental specialist Zektar was studying atmospheric data from Earth's surface. Sirs, I've been analyzing Earth's weather patterns. The planet experiences regular environmental disasters that would destroy most galactic civilizations. Hurricanes with wind speeds that would level our cities. Earthquakes that split the ground open. Volcanic eruptions that release toxic gases. And the humans live through these events, not just live through them. They have built permanent settlements in areas where these disasters occur regularly. They seem to consider natural catastrophes a normal part of life. Admiral Vextai felt his breathing apparatus working harder as stress affected his system. So every human civilian has survival training equivalent to our special forces? It appears to be much more extensive than our special forces training, Quindar replied. Our soldiers train for specific combat scenarios. Humans train by living their entire lives in conditions we would classify as active combat zones. The Admiral reviewed the tactical implications. If humans considered Class 12 Deathworld conditions to be normal living situations, then their actual military forces would be beyond anything the galaxy had encountered. Sir, Tactical Officer Morden said quietly, there's something else. I've been analyzing the human's casual behavior during our meeting. He showed no fear response to our ships, our weapons, or our technology. Either he was displaying incredible psychological warfare tactics or what? Or humans are so accustomed to deadly situations that a fleet of alien warships doesn't register as particularly threatening to them. The aliens considered this possibility in silence. They had traveled across the galaxy with advanced military technology, expecting to intimidate a primitive species. Instead, they had met a human who waved at them like they were neighbors stopping by for a visit. Admiral Vextai made a decision. Prepare an immediate message to the Galactic Council. Classification level, maximum priority. Message content. First contact with Earth reveals a species of biological extremists evolved on a Class 12 Deathworld. Recommend immediate diplomatic alliance and complete avoidance of military conflict. He paused, thinking about Jaewon sitting on the park bench in his sandals, casually describing survival scenarios that would traumatize galactic military veterans. Add this note. Every human civilian should be considered equivalent to our elite shock troops. Their actual military capabilities are unknown, but presumed to be beyond current galactic power classifications. The message was sent within the hour. Across the galaxy, military strategists and diplomatic corps would spend the next several months trying to figure out how to approach a species that considered lethal environmental hazards to be minor inconveniences. Meanwhile, back on Earth, Jae-won was having dinner at a small restaurant near the refugee camp, completely unaware that he had accidentally prevented an intergalactic war just by being himself. 3 weeks after the alien fleet's departure, Dr. Han-Sol Kim was still trying to understand what had happened. The aliens had sent him a final message thanking him for the educational experience and promising to return with a proper diplomatic mission. They also mentioned something about updating their databases and contacting their government. Han-Sol had spent those weeks trying to figure out where his translation had gone wrong. His student Yunbi Park had been helping him analyze the original alien messages and their replies. "Professor," Yunbi said, looking up from her computer, "I think I found the problem." She had been working with a new translation program designed specifically for the alien language structure. The results were very different from Han-Sol's original interpretation. The aliens weren't asking about cultural strength projects at all, Yunbi explained. They were asking about military capabilities. They wanted to know about Earth's weapons and defenses. Han-Sol felt his stomach drop. "So they thought my message was a military briefing. When you wrote about Korean resilience and survival during wars, they thought you were describing military training. When you invited them to see human strength projects, they thought you were offering to demonstrate weapon systems." Han-Sol sat down heavily in his chair. "I accidentally made first contact with aliens, and I told them we were dangerous." "Actually," Yunbi said, "I think your mistake might have saved us. Look at this." She showed him the alien fleet's final transmission, which had been sent to coordinates throughout the galaxy. It was a warning message about Earth, but not the kind of warning Han-Sol had expected. "They're telling other aliens to be careful around humans. But not because they think we're aggressive," Yunbi explained. "They think we're, what's the word? Incredibly durable." That same week, Jae-won was surprised to receive a phone call from the Korean government. A woman identifying herself as Dr. Mi-young Kang from the newly created Department of Xenological Affairs asked if he could come to Seoul for a meeting. "We understand you were involved in the recent first contact incident," Dr. Mi-young said when Jae-won arrived at her office. "The aliens sent some interesting reports about their visit to Earth." She showed him translated copies of the alien messages. Jae-won read through them with growing amazement and embarrassment. "They think I'm some kind of super soldier?" Jae-won asked. "They think all humans are super soldiers," Dr. Mi-young replied. "According to their reports, they believe Earth is one of the most dangerous planets in the galaxy, and humans are essentially living weapon systems adapted to survive in lethal conditions." Jae-won looked at his reflection in the office window. He was wearing the same cargo shorts and t-shirt he had worn to meet the aliens. His sandals were propped up next to his chair. "But I'm just a medic who does disaster relief work." "That's exactly the problem," Dr. Mi-young said. "What you consider normal humanitarian work, they consider evidence of superhuman survival abilities. They've classified Earth as something called a Class 12 Deathworld." She explained what the aliens had discovered about Earth's environment: the oxygen levels that would poison most galactic species, the atmospheric pressure that would crush their bodies, the bacteria and viruses that humans lived with peacefully, but would kill aliens instantly. So when you told them about working in flood zones and disease areas, they thought you were describing military operations in biological warfare conditions. Dr. Mi-young continued. Jae-won started laughing. "And when I showed them pictures of refugee camps, they thought you were showing them military training facilities where humans practice surviving in combat conditions." The laughter continued until Jae-won had tears in his eyes. "I accidentally convinced aliens that humans are unstoppable death machines by showing them photos of helping flood victims." Dr. Mi-young smiled. "The good news is that they want to be our allies, not our enemies. The Galactic Council has sent a formal diplomatic mission requesting a friendship treaty with Earth." Over the following months, Earth's first official contact with galactic civilization proceeded smoothly. The aliens were incredibly polite and careful during all interactions. They wore full environmental suits whenever visiting Earth's surface. They brought their own food and water, afraid that human food might be toxic to their systems. The galactic diplomatic team was amazed by everything they saw on Earth. Human cities built in areas with regular earthquakes, farms in regions that experienced seasonal floods, people living normal lives in places where the radiation levels would require evacuation on most galactic worlds. Jae-won was officially appointed as Earth's first civilian liaison for galactic relations, though he was never quite sure what that meant. His job seemed to involve continuing his normal disaster relief work, while occasionally meeting with alien diplomats who wanted to observe human survival training exercises. Is it true that human children play games in contaminated soil? Asked Ambassador Kelnari during one visit. You mean like making mud pies? J1 asked. Sure, kids love playing in dirt. The ambassador made careful notes. And this exposure to biological hazards strengthens their immune systems? Well, yes, that's how immunity works. More careful notes. Fascinating. Your species uses controlled exposure to biological weapons as part of childhood development. J1 stopped trying to correct these misunderstandings. The alien seemed happier thinking that humans were incredibly tough, rather than realizing that alien biology was just very fragile. So many. Choi became famous across 3 star systems for her refugee camp management skills. Alien social scientists wrote papers about her ability to coordinate survival operations for hundreds of individuals using minimal resources. She was invited to speak at galactic conferences about disaster preparedness. I just help people organize temporary housing, Somin told Jae-won after her 3rd academic award ceremony. Why do they think this is so impressive? Because most galactic species die if they lose their permanent housing for more than a few days, Jae-won explained. They can't survive in temporary shelters. Grandmother Hae-young became a legend in galactic folklore. Her stories about surviving the Korean War were translated into dozens of alien languages. Young aliens across the galaxy told each other scared stories about the human elder who ate tree bark and dug underground shelters with her bare hands. When a delegation of alien military historians asked to interview her, Grandmother Hae-young served them tea and cookies while describing her wartime experiences. The aliens took careful notes and asked detailed questions about her combat survival techniques. Combat? Grandmother Hae-young asked Jae-won quietly in Korean. I was just trying to keep my children alive. To them, keeping children alive during a war counts as advanced military strategy, Jae-won replied. The final diplomatic protocol signed between Earth and the Galactic Council contained an unusual clause. Earth agrees to provide advance warning before conducting any major strength training, exercises that might be misinterpreted as military preparations by galactic observers. Hansol Kim was appointed as Earth's first professor of xenolinguistics and put in charge of preventing future translation errors. Eunbi Park became his assistant and the first human to learn proper galactic standard languages. The galaxy officially reclassified Earth from unknown threat level to extreme survival specialist approach with diplomatic respect and environmental caution. And in a small apartment in Seoul, Jae-won Lee put his feet up on his coffee table, wiggled his toes in his old sandals, and read the latest news reports about Earth's growing reputation as the most dangerous inhabited planet in the galaxy. He thought it was the funniest thing he had ever heard.